You can. You can stand next to it if you would prefer. Good afternoon. I am so happy to be with you. I am Julia Sheppard. My husband, John Sheppard, and I were among the original members of the Library Club, founded in 1884. It was due to our efforts that the present library was established. Our club, however, was not the first such organization in Penn. Long before I met and married John and moved to this village, his hometown, there was the Penn Washington Association, organized in 1840, a year before I was born. The association was incorporated under the laws of New York State in 1842 to conduct a public library and to carry on literary and scientific lectures. Clearly, the people of this village have been aware of and concerned for the necessity of having books available for all its citizens. The Library Club, of which Mr. Sheppard and I were members, had 3 rules. First, each member contributed $1.50 for the purchase of books and necessary expenses. Second, on every other Saturday throughout the year, they deliver to the member whose name follows the preceding member on the list the volume which the preceding member had had for 2 weeks. We liked rules. They needed to be clear. Third, to meet at the close of the year to decide upon the disposition of the books. The members of the Library Club experienced difficulties in raising funds for new books and in keeping the ones we had in condition for circulation. It is fortunate that Penn, at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, was the home of many persons who were involved in far-reaching social change and recognized the importance of having books accessible for its citizens. Those residents belonging to such clubs as the Utopian Club, the Shakespeare Club, the Women's Club, which I founded in 1894, and to the various reading circles certainly contributed to the efforts necessary to establish a public library. I take great pride in my small part to bring this service to the people of Penn and the surrounding area. Thank you for continuing our work.
Mr. Carnegie.
Good day to you. Good day.
Good day.
How little I knew when I decided to build a library, how successful they would be. I am impressed with this group. Thank you for inviting me. I understand you call yourselves the Friends of the Library, so I hope you'll indulge me when I say, welcome, friends, to the library. It's been about 120 years since I first heard that you needed a new library in your beautiful village. I'm pleased to be able to visit with you across time and share my story as this Carnegie Library moves through its 2nd century of service to Penn. I passed from the life of a businessman, and now I live on in books. Books is where I am most comfortable. You've asked me here to talk about books and our library, but I feel it's important to share with you a little bit about my life. Your hills and lakes remind me of my home, Scotland. I was born in the town of Dunfermline, which is known as a historical capital of Scotland, and in its abbey there rests one of my heroes, Robert the Bruce. I lived with my brother Tom, who was 5 years younger than I, and my mother and father in one room of a 2-room cottage. In the other room were the 2 hand looms my father used to produce the weaving he then sold to support us. We were surrounded by family and were considered radicals. because we did not believe in the English monarchy that ruled us. Changes were afoot in those days. Steam-powered looms were replacing hand looms as the Industrial Revolution moved through the world. My father could no longer support us, and in 1848 we borrowed enough money to move to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the urging of an uncle who lived there. We sailed to New York and traveled by the Erie Canal to Pittsburgh. My mother and father were hoping for a better life. It was not to be. My father could not adapt to the new ways of doing things. He could not support us with his hand weaving. Mother began repairing shoes when she wasn't taking care of us in our home. At the age of 13, I went to work as a bobbin boy in a knitting mill for $1.25 a week to help support the family. It was the end of my schooling. Before long, I found a better job, stoking boilers in a Pittsburgh factory. Not long after, I was recommended for a position in the Pittsburgh Telegraph office as a messenger boy. I began working there, and it would influence the rest of my life. I was smart, ambitious, and energetic. I made it a point to learn all I could about the businesses and businessmen that I delivered telegrams to. I felt might be able to use the information to better my life. When I wasn't delivering telegrams, I was in the telegraph office and eventually taught myself to transcribe Morse code. I became a telegrapher of some note. My energy and ability were noticed by many important people in Pittsburgh. One of those people, Thomas Scott, was the superintendent of the Pittsburgh division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He had noticed my talents and hired me as his personal telegrapher and clerk. In time, I actually replaced him as superintendent, but he became a lifelong friend and business partner. J. Edgar Thompson, president of the railroad, also became an integral part of my business life. These two men taught me about railroad operations at a time when they were the largest and most successful industry in the country. During the Civil War, Mr. Scott was appointed an Assistant Secretary of War for Transportation. I was his assistant and placed in charge of military railroads and government telegraphs. I also organized a force of railroad men to respond in emergencies. We saw immediate duty repairing railroad lines between Baltimore and Annapolis Junction and transporting General Butler's troops to Washington, then evacuating them after Bull Run. During this time, it became very clear to me that there was a great need to provide materials of all kinds to meet wartime demands. As a railroad man, it was obvious we needed to produce much more iron to build locomotives, rails, and train cars. I realized that iron could be used to replace the wooden bridges so common at the time. I and other partners formed the Keystone Bridge Company in 1863. Soon, we realized that steel would be a much superior product for the manufacture of these critical materials. We began learning all we could about how to produce steel from iron ore. On a trip to England, we observed Mr. Bessemer's blast furnace and brought that technology to Pittsburgh. The age of iron ended and the age of steel began when the blast furnaces we built began production. Soon, my company was producing more steel than all of England. I believe it to be true that when I sold my many businesses to Mr. J.P. Morgan in 1902, I became the richest man in the world. I began the story of my life telling you that I came to America as a poor immigrant with ambition, energy, and intellect. These qualities were essential to becoming a successful businessman, but of equal or greater importance was the doors opened through my love of books. It is from the written word a person can gain information, inspiration, and education. When I was a child, there were very few public free libraries. Most people were too poor to have many books, and many could not read. For most of us, life was very hard, and the manual labor most of us did not require a formal education. My parents felt differently, and made sure I learned to read. The world opened to this poor boy from Dunfermline in the few books I could find. As a messenger boy in Pittsburgh, I was able to borrow a book a week from the private 400-book library of Colonel James Anderson, who opened his home on Saturdays to the working boys of Pittsburgh. Colonel Anderson's generosity led me to the belief that there is no better use money could be put to than to provide books for those who would use them. That a public library built in a community willing to support it would yield treasure far greater than the dollars spent on the building itself. In 1881, I was able to build the first Carnegie Library in Dunfermline. For the next 30 years, I provided funds for nearly 3,000 more of them in all 48 states and several countries. My only stipulations were that the community provide a suitable location and annual support equal to 10% of the building cost. The first library in Penn was known as the Penn Library Club. It was a subscription organization that turned over a collection of about 1,400 books and a treasury of $24.25 to the Penn Academy where the collection grew to about 4,000 books. By 1902, when the library was moved to the Presbyterian Church, when the old school was due for demolition. Mr. Hatley Armstrong, president of the library board, sat down with George Snow, treasurer, and Henrietta Hicks, secretary and volunteer librarian. The group determined it was time to approach me for money for a new standalone library. I received a letter in December of 1902 from Mr. Armstrong requesting $10,000 to build the library and buy the land. It took several months to clear the way to allow me to make the donation. As I said earlier, my only stipulations were that the building be built on a suitable site and the community donate $1,000 annually to maintain and operate the building. The village continues to meet that commitment to this day. Public-spirited citizens donated $300 toward the purchase of property, and a lot on Main Street was purchased from George and Edward Hopkins. Their father had bought the lot from Abraham Wagner in 1827 and operated a successful sawmill, cabinet factory, and coffin shop for many years on the short dead-end street named Hopkins Place. In September of 1903, by a vote of 487 to 93, the community approved the construction and support of the building. Mr. Armstrong sought advice from many different experts experienced in building and managing libraries, including Melville Dewey. One letter exchanged with James Canfield, librarian of the Columbia University Library in New York City, is of particular interest, for in it Mr. Canfield states, "Don't leave it to the architect, ask the librarian." Which is an appropriate place for me to say thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I'd like to jump out of character for just a little minute to just share a personal part of this history. When I was a kid, 70 or more years ago, I lived in a house on Hopkins Place that was built about where the parking lot starts. My brother and I grew up playing in what used to be the yard, which is now the front of the building. And Sarah actually has a picture of it somewhere. Just Joe, it is personal. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. By way of introduction, I am Henrietta Hicks Kimball, and I had the distinct honor of being the first librarian for the Penn Public Library, and I would like to tell you how that came about. I was so fortunate as to have grown up here in Penn. My parents had moved here from Columbia County, as my mother's brothers had settled in what you know called Benton. I was named Henrietta for my father, Henry Hicks, a prominent man in Yates County, a staunch temperance man, and as the newspaper noted in his obituary, an undeviated and earnest Republican. I attended Penn schools, such as they were, but my life shows that I took an active role in my education, especially as an adult, even spending a few months in Europe when I was 24 with some friends on what was often referred to as a grand tour. More importantly, I joined a number of societies and associations to learn much more than schools could teach me. One of them was the Library Club. And that group, as you have heard, started a library open to the public, a public library in the Penn Academy, just up the street from here. That library would be administered by 5 trustees, selected from the ranks of the Library Club members. The charter was dated November 21st, 1895, and I was appointed as one of those first trustees. As you heard, the library acquired books by donation and was housed in the academy, and all we needed was a person to be in charge of the library, a librarian. I volunteered, and since there was no money to provide a salary for this position, I worked without pay from 1895 to 1906. I was fortunate, because I had inherited my house on Court Street from my father, and he had provided for me in his will. Those were such exciting times. We were outgrowing our space at the Penn Academy and looking to have our own building for our present collection and the future. Mr. Carnegie has spoken eloquently about that part of our history, emphasizing the contributions of Mr. Armstrong, who was the president of the Library Club, and he provided the impetus to create a truly public library. He made personal contact with Mr. Carnegie. We could not have accomplished what we did without him. When we finally moved our collection into the new Carnegie Library in 1905, I continued my work as librarian. And for many years, we were open 3 days a week, from 2 to 4 p.m. I chose every book that was put on a shelf. And I was particularly careful about the books I chose for young people. Every book in the children's section focused on character building rather than sheer entertainment. And I think it's appropriate for me to share with you how I felt about my position as librarian, which, by the way, spanned 30 years. There was to be no noise in the building. Not even a whisper. I felt that libraries were places to read quietly, not to socialize, or heaven forbid, hang out. As I hear some young people say today. And I do hear them. I'm not a ghost. I don't believe in ghosts. I did die in 1934 after having retired in 1925. I'm not a ghost, but my spirit remains here in this building, as evidenced by the plaque downstairs on the wall. To live in the hearts of one's friends is not to die. The library, its contents, its patrons, and the community supporting it were my friends. And I thank you for this invitation to speak to you today. Out of character, I'd like to acknowledge the help of Joni Hand and Patty Larzalier for their research on Mrs. Kimball. Patty portrayed Mrs. Kimball, Henrietta Hicks Kimball, a few years ago when Joni was still working at the library. And Patty, I could see by the notes that she made, asked all the best questions, and Joni was always the best at digging up good stuff about people. So, and Angela gave me huge files, so it's really, really helped. So I say thank you to the Penn Public Library staff, past and present, for saving and storing all the important stories that made the library what it is today and will be tomorrow. There you go, there's your file back.